Cuba and Venezuela denounced the criminal policy of the United States during the 43rd session of the UN Human Rights Council. The Commonwealth Observer Group has arrived in Guyana in the lead-up to the March 2nd general elections. And the British government's new immigration policy has sparked controversy in the United Kingdom. Hi, from the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba. This is From the South. I'm Cristina Escobar. We begin in Geneva, where this Tuesday saw the second day of the 43rd session of the UN Human Rights Council. Speaking during the high-level segment of the session, Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez reiterated that U.S. policy towards Cuba represents a massive and flagrant violation of human rights.
The United States has increased the implementation of the blockade against Cuba. This is an act of genocide under the 1948 Convention. It is a flagrant, massive, and systematic violation of our people's human rights. As the infamous memorandum of the State Department dated 6th of April 1960 points out, they have tried to reduce our people to hunger and despair. The implementation of unconventional measures to prevent our country from procuring fuel has harmed every field of daily life for our citizens: public transport, education, healthcare, food. The full implementation of the Helms-Burton Act has deepened the extraterritorial impact of this embargo.
And Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez stressed Cuba's effort to develop and prosper despite the U.S. blockade against the island, while adding that the country will present its candidacy to become a member of the Human Rights Council for the 2021-2023 period.
Despite the United States embargo and hostility, Cuba is continuing to build an independent, sovereign, socialist, democratic, prosperous, and sustainable nation on the basis of the time-tested capacity to resist and on the basis of our people's creativity. Cuba will continue to live up to its international cooperation commitments in the field of human rights. In particular, we will fulfill our obligations that arise from international instruments in this field. Cuba reaffirms its commitment to the Human Rights Council, and we have decided to present our candidacy to become a member of the Council for the 2021-2023 period.
Meanwhile, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza also denounced before the Council the same imperialist policies imposed by Washington against the Bolivarian Republic as well as on other nations.
This Council has repeatedly condemned the coercive measures that have been used, such as economic sanctions, and the Council has been alarmed by the disproportionate and indiscriminate effects of these coercive measures on all of the population, but in particular on women, children, boys and girls, the most vulnerable amongst us. But despite all these affirmations, the governments of the United States and other countries who go along with them continue to implement unilateral coercive measures on ideological grounds with a view to forcing other states to renounce their sovereign rights. They intend to impose their political and economic model and to bring about forced regime changes using these tools as a perverse tool. This is completely contrary to international law, and the idea is to get their hand on the resources of the countries concerned. They put up barriers in access to medication and healthcare, and they prevent countries from using their own means of subsistence. This is criminal. Coercive measures amount in practice to weapons of mass destruction. We are suffering a systematic attack against our people, which is being waged by the United States authorities in full awareness of the effects that ensue. The social and humanitarian consequences are, in fact, very carefully planned goals which are pursued in order to achieve the unlawful political and economic goals that Washington has set itself.
And we continue with developments in Colombia, where following the demands made by several Congress members and social organizations, the country's constitutional court revoked norms which limited the president's power to sign peace agreements with armed groups. The move opens a new possibility to directly negotiate with the National Liberation Army guerrilla force. Previously, it had been up to the National Security Council to determine whether an organization fulfilled the requirements to be considered an organized armed group and define the terms and conditions of any peace talks with the government. Analysts consider that this new ruling could help Colombia continue on the path to peace through negotiations between the state and the ELN, which were suspended by President Iván Duque in January 2019. Meanwhile, the Colombian Congress approved the creation of a high-level commission for the prevention and monitoring of attacks against persons in the process of reintegration into civilian life. The decision was
Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Hi, welcome back. We continue in Haiti because fears are growing over an increasingly fragile security situation in this country after police and soldiers fought a deadly gun battle lasting for hours outside the country's presidential palace. The violence broke out when protesting police officers, some in plain clothes and wearing masks, used the opening of the carnival festivities to stage the latest in a series of demonstrations against poor working conditions and calling for the right to unionize. The clash between the police and military comes in the midst of a long-running political crisis that has seen intermittent mass protests against the government of Jovenel Moïse over a corruption scandal and the contested elections of 2017, the results of which the opposition has never accepted. Authorities announced the cancellation of the carnival, warning of the risk of a bloodbath. And turning to Guyana now, an 11-member Commonwealth Observer Group has arrived to observe the pre-election polling day and post-election activities as the country prepares for general elections. Over the next 3 days, the group will continue to meet with key stakeholders, including the Guyana Elections Commission, political parties, civil society, the media, the police, citizens, and other international observers. The group's mission is to ensure that all processes are in keeping with Guyana's laws and its regional and international commitments. The group was constituted following an invitation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in November.
How do you conduct an election and make sure it's honest?
Meanwhile, the ruling a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change approved the Guyana Elections Commission's decision to reduce the use of private residences as polling stations, stating it would put the country in a better position for credible elections. The opposition has rejected the move to instead use public buildings or tents as polling stations. Meanwhile, others believe that no party should be pushing for the restoration of a system that caused conflict and doubt amongst the electorate for years. Trinidad and Tobago Carnival celebrations are in the final stretch as crowds flood the streets across the country. The event is well known for participants' colorful costumes with the use of feathers, beads, and sequins. Calypso and soca music set the rhythm for dancers, while stick fighting and limbo competitions are also important features of the festivities. The most popular song played in the front of the judges wins the coveted Road March title. An indigenous leader was murdered in the Terrabar region of Costa Rica on Monday night. Jerry Rivera, aged 23, was helping to defend 13 indigenous families who have been under attack from landowners since they recovered their ancestral lands. The Costa Rican National Front of Indigenous Peoples has accused the government of doing nothing to prevent such attacks. Indigenous communities are supposed to enjoy protective measures as indicated by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. However, indigenous groups in Costa Rica continue to fight both for their land and their autonomy. The surge in new coronavirus cases in Iran, Japan and South Korea on Tuesday fueled fears of a pandemic as the disease took root in some of the world's poorest and worst equipped countries. The rapid spread abroad came as the World Health Organization announced that the epidemic had peaked at its epicenter in China, where it has killed more than 2,600 people and infected over 77,000. The situation has worsened elsewhere, with more than 40 deaths reported outside of China, prompting restrictions on travelers from infected nations and domestic efforts to isolate suspected patients. Chinese students from the early years to high school are heading back to the classroom after an extended winter break due to coronavirus fears. Students must undergo temperature checks and wear face masks. In addition, certain sports activities are temporarily suspended to minimize close body contact.
During the winter break, our teachers were making preparations. There were side-by-side desks and group desks in the classrooms, and we had to split them up as a preventive measure. We also opened up all our windows and air vents. First day of school is a happy occasion. We need to let the parents and pupils have a peace of mind. We need all our teachers and staff not only be prepared but also do things properly to make the school a safe place.
Meanwhile, hundreds of people were confined to their rooms at Tenerife Hotel on Tuesday, this is Spain, after an Italian tourist was hospitalized as a suspected case of coronavirus. 5 cases of COVID-19 have been identified in Spain, including one in Barcelona.
Since last night, there is a new case in Santa Cruz in Tenerife, where an Italian citizen coming from Italy is in isolation until the confirmation of a second test that will be carried out as part of a...
Welcome back, and we begin this final section of the show in Spain, where protests by agricultural workers against low produced prices and precarious working conditions have mobilized 5,000 tractors and some 16,000 protesters, who have now begun to block 4 main roads in the province of Seville. The demonstrations are part of a national campaign in which rural workers are demanding a future worthy of the agricultural sector. On Tuesday, the Spanish government introduced new regulations on the pricing of food in supermarkets in response to weeks of nationwide farmers' protest over plummeting incomes. Under the new rules, contracts between farmers and the companies distributing vegetables, fruit and meat will have to reflect the costs of production, and final retail prices must be appropriately adjusted. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson presented his new post-Brexit points-based immigration system to the House of Commons on Monday, which puts an end to the free movement of EU citizens and prioritises high-skilled workers. The Conservative government was accused of failing to evaluate the economic impact of the measures after a report indicated that they will have zero impact on creating more jobs for UK workers. The Labour Party has said that the dependency of some sectors on foreign workers will force the government to make numerous exceptions, making the new immigration policies pointless. Others have warned that 10 months are not enough time for companies to prepare for the end of free movement of EU citizens to the United Kingdom.
Thank you so much. All applicants will need to demonstrate that they will have a job offer from an approved sponsor. The job must be at an appropriate skill level. The applicant must be able to speak English and meet tougher criminality standards and checks.
The points-based immigration system establishes that overseas citizens would have to reach 70 points to be able to work in the UK. Speaking English and having the offer of a highly skilled job with an approved sponsor would give them 50 points, while their qualification, salary offer and working in a sector with shortages will grant extra points. It is expected that agriculture, gastronomy and nursing services could face difficulties to recruit personnel following the introduction of the new system.
Perhaps because their attitudes, especially on refugees, are perceived to be harsher than our own.
And in the midst of continued demonstrations, the second day of Julian Assange's extradition trial took place in London this Tuesday. Assange appeared in the dock at the London Court on Monday for the first day of this extraordinary trial, where he is battling to avoid extradition to the United States, where he faces 18 charges and a jail term of up to 175 years for leaking state secrets in thousands of classified documents published by WikiLeaks in 2010. Assange's attorney, Edward Fitzgerald, said an extradition to an American prison would be the height of inhumanity and cited a medical report indicating the risk of Assange committing suicide. A police officer was among 9 people killed, while dozens were injured in protest against India's new Citizenship Act in the context of US President Donald Trump's first official visit to the country. Supporters and opponents of the act threw stones at each other in the capital of New Delhi on Monday night and set fire to houses, shops, vehicles and gasoline pumps. Critics say the act is discriminatory as it offers Indian citizenship to migrants of different religions, but not Muslims. The act is seen as part of a Prime Minister Narendra Modi's attempt to remold India into a Hindu nation. The legislation came into force in December, and at least 30 people have been killed in clashes with police since. Meanwhile, as preparations for Trump's visit to India cost the country $18 million, hundreds have marched through the streets rejecting the president's visit.
Donald Trump cannot be our guest here because such a facet bigot. He just cannot be any kind of good to India and Indian people. So, Narendra Modi may bow down in front of you, but the Indian people, the Indian general masses of India, they are not going to say that you are welcome. India says, "Goodbye, Trump, you are not our guest."
Dozens of Palestinian families in the Gaza Strip have been left homeless following a barrage of airstrikes by the Israeli army. Israeli fighter jets and helicopters launched airstrikes in the early hours of Sunday, targeting various private and public buildings in the Khan Yunis area, located in the south of the besieged Gaza Strip. No casualties have been reported so far, but the airstrikes, which were allegedly a response to rockets launched from the Strip, have disrupted the supply of basic services such as water and electricity. Egypt's former president Hosni Mubarak has died at the age of 91 in the capital, Cairo, according to state media. A state television announced that Mubarak died at a Cairo hospital where he had undergone an unspecified surgical procedure. Mubarak spent nearly 3 decades in office before he was ousted by the military in 2011 following weeks of protests during the so-called Arab Spring. He was found guilty of complicity in the killing of protesters during the uprising. The conviction was subsequently overturned and he was freed in March 2017. And we conclude in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the army killed 6 members of the Allied Democratic Forces during 2 offensives. The rebel group is charged with massacring almost 400 civilians since November last year in the northeastern city of Beni. The first offensive began on Sunday, 18